So I want you to just imagine waking up at like 5 a.m. Oh man, the worst time, right? Literally the worst. And you know that specific, just awful feeling. Your ear, it's completely clogged. It's throbbing. You've got this dull ache radiating all the way down your jaw.
Yeah, that deep, almost pressure feeling, like a bubble that just won't pop.
Exactly, right? And you're just like swallowing aggressively. You're holding your nose, blowing out, just trying to force that awful pressure to pop so you can get some relief. We've all been there. It's miserable.
It really, really is. Now, I want you to hold that deeply personal, frustrating feeling and jump with me to the spring of 2026, the Strait of Hormuz, which is quite the leap, I know.
That's quite the leap, yeah.
It is, but stick with me. We're looking at this massive, heavily armed military standoff, where roughly a fifth of the global oil supply is just completely gridlocked.
So we have two completely different realities here. I mean, one is a minor physical annoyance playing out in a dark bedroom, and the other is this cataclysmic global crisis dictating the fate of nations.
Exactly. On the surface, they have absolutely nothing in common. But our deep dive today relies on this fascinating source document and a really detailed infographic. We have to explore a framework they call the choke point code.
The choke point code. Right, I like that.
Yeah, and the core argument here, Marcus, is that these two scenarios, your congested, painful ear and a terrifying geopolitical standoff, actually share a universal mechanical logic when it comes to blockages.
Because the human instinct across both scales is identical, right? Like when we encounter a congested, high-pressure node, our immediate impulse is just to apply force to clear it.
We try to blast the blockage open, exactly. We blow hard to pop the ear, or, we send in naval fleets to secure the strait. But the true engineering solution, like the mechanism that actually restores flow, is to step back and open a drain below the blockage.
Okay, but before we go any further, let's set some clear boundaries for you listening right now. We are absolutely not suggesting that drinking some herbal tea and clearing your sinuses will somehow untangle the global oil trade.
Right, no. The text is exceptionally careful to label this as isomorphism, not causation. Isomorphism, you know?
Isomorphism, okay?
Yeah, in systems theory, isomorphism just means that two totally separate systems share the exact same structural grammar. The human body and the planet's shipping routes are not magically communicating with one another. That would be wild, right? They aren't talking. They simply deal with pressure gradients, choke points, feedback loops, and drainage in the exact same mathematical and structural ways.
So we're going to test that theory, starting with the physical body. The primary physiological claim in our sources is that a clogged ear can actually release the exact moment your gut moves.
Which sounds crazy at first.
It does. I have to throw a flag on the plate here because mechanically that makes zero sense to me. I mean, the ear is connected to the back of the throat via the eustachian tube, right? But the gut is buried way down below the esophageal sphincter. How on earth is a stomach ache locking up a door inside my head?
Well, the connection relies on a literal physical wire. It's the vagus nerve, which is also known as cranial nerve X. To understand this, we have to look at how your parasympathetic nervous system is built. Think of your nervous system as having two modes, right? You have the gas pedal, which is your fight or flight stress response.
Right, the sympathetic system.
Exactly. And then you have the brakes, which is your rest and digest parasympathetic system. The vagus nerve is basically the structural steel cable of that braking system.
So we are talking about an actual electrical pathway mapping the body down to the millimeter.
The ear itself has a dedicated branch of the vagus nerve called Arnold's nerve, and it physically touches the lining of the ear canal. Wait, is that why?
Wait, is that why if you've ever used a cotton swab and suddenly felt a weird urge to cough?
Yup, you've just stimulated the Arnold reflex. Oh, wow, I always wondered why that happened. Yeah, it's all connected. But the critical piece of this puzzle lies in the traffic direction of that nerve. We usually assume that brain is the boss, right? Just sending orders down to the organs, like top-down management.
Right.
But in reality, about 80% of vagal traffic runs from the gut up to the brain.
So the gut is constantly reporting its status back to headquarters.
Exactly. A distended, stagnant gut, say from a heavy meal you haven't digested or, severe constipation, it isn't just sitting there quietly. It is actively broadcasting a high-alert distress signal upward to the brainstem.
Okay, and what does the brainstem do with that?
When it receives that alarm, it interprets a systemic threat and clamps down on various peripheral systems. One of the mechanisms it locks down is the eustachian tube, which is that tiny valve responsible for equalizing pressure in your middle ear.
Which means when you are holding your nose and forcing a Valsalva maneuver to blow your ear open, you are applying sheer physical force against a valve that your own brain is actively locking shut.
You're fighting your own nervous system. That is wild, right? The alternative is changing the signal. Decompressing the gut cuts off that upward vagal alarm.
So the threat goes away.
Yeah, the brainstem finally reads a threat-reduced signal. Your parasympathetic braking system engages, and the smooth muscles clamping that eustachian tube suddenly relax. The pressure equalizes on its own without any forcing.
And our sources point out that you don't just have to take their word for this, which I love. Yeah, they provide a falsifiable test you can run yourself using modern technology, because good analysis always demands a measurable mechanism.
The text suggests putting on a heart rate variability strap, like a fitness tracker, sort of. Yeah. HRV tracks the tiny fluctuations between your heartbeats, which is a highly accurate way to measure your autonomic state in real time.
Okay, so how do we test the ear thing?
If you relieve your back stasis and the strap records a measurable spike in your HRV, which proves your body just shifted into a parasympathetic rest state, and then your ear pops, you've proven the mechanism. You're actually measuring the electricity of the drain.
Precisely. What fascinates me is that long before we had HRV straps or functional MRI machines to track these nervous system shifts, ancient medical traditions were mapping out these exact same pressure dynamics. They really were. I mean, how did human beings figure this out thousands of years before we understood neuroanatomy?
Well, they observed the pattern language of the body over centuries. The text brings in traditional Chinese medicine, or TCM, which independently identified this exact structural logic, though, they use an entirely different vocabulary.
Right. In TCM, they pair the lung and the large intestine together as a functional unit, and they call it the metal organ couple.
Okay, I'm gonna need some translation there because metal organ couple sounds incredibly esoteric. Are we talking about actual minerals in the blood, or is this purely metaphorical?
It's more of an ancient clinical shorthand. In their system, the metal element governs boundary tissues, so things like your skin, your respiratory mucosa, and your immune defenses.
Tissues that interact with the outside world, exactly. The lung takes things in from the boundary, and the large intestine pushes waste out. In a healthy functioning system, the physiological energy of both those organs is supposed to flow downward. And if it doesn't, when that downward descent fails, you get a backup. The pressure reverses and congests the upper orifices, so your sinuses, your eyes, and your ears.
It really reminds me of doing IT troubleshooting for a complex server. That's a good way to look at it, because the sources mention the TCM horary clock, which assigns different primary organs to specific 2-hour windows of the day. The logic is that knowing when the system crashes gives you the diagnostic clue for which underlying program is causing the error.
Because the timing of the symptom often reveals more than the symptom itself. The sources contrast two very different scenarios for waking up with that painful earache we talked about in the intro. Let's look at that timing data. They compare an earache hitting between 3 and 5 a.m. versus one hitting between 5 and 7 a.m.
Right. So waking up congested between 3 and 5 a.m. places you squarely in the lung window. The underlying blockage is upstream. It's a fundamental respiratory issue, like a failure of the lung's energy to descend and clear, so the ear is just catching the overflow.
Exactly. The painful ear is just collateral damage from a chest and sinus system that isn't draining. Yeah, treating the ear directly won't help much. You have to open the respiratory tract. But the 5 to 7 a.m. window tells a totally different story.
Completely different. That 2-hour block is the large intestine window, which actually aligns with peak colonic motility in human biology.
Meaning that's when your gut naturally wants to move, right? So if you wake up with an ear clog during that specific window and it magically clears 10 minutes after your morning bowel movement, it was a downstream eliminatory clog. The valve in your head was literally being held hostage by lower gut stasis.
Wow. So an earache at 4 a.m. and an earache at 6 a.m. look and feel exactly the same, but structurally, they're entirely different diseases.
Exactly. So if we step out of the diagnostic phase, how do we actually build the physical drain to fix this? The sources outline a specific toolkit. Yeah, the intervention relies on what acupuncturists call distant points. Instead of massaging the painful area around the ear, which honestly just adds local irritation, the goal is to drag the biological pressure downward, away from the head entirely.
and the infographic maps these distant points out. First, there's LV3, known as Taichung, which is located on the top of the foot between the bones of the first two toes.
Right. They describe it as the ultimate pressure cooker release valve. But mechanically, how is pressing a foot sending a signal to the head?
You are interacting with dense bundles of nerve endings and fascial planes. By applying heavy stimulation to the distal end of a neural pathway, in this case the foot, you force the central nervous system to direct its attention and blood flow away from the congested upper body and down toward the extremities.
Drawing the energy away, yes. And to anchor that downward pull, the protocol adds ST36, or Zeus on Lee, which is located just below the knee on the outside of the shin. The text calls ST36 the primary drain for pulling energy out of a congested chest and routing it into the digestive tract.
It's a major point for downward flow. And if you really need to ground the system, they point to KD1, which is literally the lowest point on the human body, right on the sole of the foot. But we have to highlight a very serious warning the text includes about another major point in this.
No, right, the one on the hand. Yes, the warning concerns Li4, or Hegu, which is the master point on the hand for clearing issues in the face and head. The text strictly notes that this point is contraindicated during pregnancy because it is clinically documented to induce uterine contractions.
Wow, yeah. We aren't just talking about a relaxing massage here. These are real mechanical neurological triggers that force the body's energy sharply downward, and that has severe consequences if applied incorrectly.
That makes the drain, don't force logic feel incredibly tangible. But beyond physical pressure points, the sources also dig into dietary drains. They do. And I want to spend a minute here because we see this everywhere online. You know, the trendy advice to drink a glass of lemon water every morning to alkalize your blood and detox your system.
Oh, yeah. The source material addresses that trend directly and corrects the science behind it, because the idea that you can alkalize your blood with diet is a physiological myth, totally busted entirely. Right, your blood pH is tightly regulated by your kidneys and lungs, locked between 7.35 and 7.45. If a glass of lemon water could actually alter your systemic blood pH, you wouldn't be detoxing, you would be in the back of an ambulance.
But the irony the text points out is that the habit itself, like drinking lemon water or having acidic vinegar with a heavy meal, is actually highly effective just for a completely different biological reason. Right, it all comes back to clearing the choke point. The benefit isn't systemic alkalinity, it's localized digestive acid. Lemon lowers the pH in your stomach immediately after you consume it, making it more acidic. Exactly. That highly acidic environment optimizes the enzymes required to break down dense proteins, which
means it acts as a prokinetic. And I want to define that for our listeners. A prokinetic is something that speeds up the emptying of the stomach. And that circles us perfectly back to the vagus nerve. If you digest your food efficiently, you prevent gut stasis. No gut stasis means no upward vagal distress alarm, which means the eustachian tube stays relaxed and your ear stays clear. It's all connected.
And the sources also highlight ginger and peppermint oil performing similar mechanical roles. Right, so gingerol, which is the active compound in ginger, is a scientifically documented prokinetic that physically accelerates gastric emptying.
It pushes things along, yes. An enteric-coated peppermint oil works slightly differently. It acts as a smooth muscle antispasmodic. The enteric coating ensures the capsule survives the stomach acid and releases directly in
the intestines, where it actually needs to go. Exactly. And there, the menthol physically relaxes the smooth muscles of the gut wall, allowing trapped gas and matter to move. They are literal mechanical drains for internal biological pressure.
It makes complete sense on the biological level. But now we have to stress test this framework. The real question posed by the sources is whether this structural logic survives
Scaling up, the big test. Yeah, can the mechanics of an acupressure point apply to the most explosive, high-stakes geographic choke point on the planet?
So, movement 2 of our infographic transitions us from the microcosm of the body to the macrocosm of global trade. We look at the geopolitical reality of the Strait of Hormuz in the early months of 2026.
Let's walk through that timeline exactly as the sources reported, keeping this strictly to the mechanics of the event. On February 28, 2026, coordinated U.S. and Israeli military strikes on Iran result in the death of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei.
A massive trigger point.
Right. And in immediate retaliation, Iran completely closes and heavily mines the Strait of Hormuz. To understand the gravity of that, Hormuz is a narrow 40-mile stretch of water that handles roughly 20% of the world's daily petroleum consumption. Shutting it down isn't just a military maneuver, it's an economic heart attack.
The Revolutionary Guard forbids all commercial passage and begins attacking merchant vessels. By April 13th, following the collapse of a brief ceasefire, the United States responds by imposing a massive, overwhelming naval blockade on Iranian ports.
So now we have two highly advanced militaries clamped down on a single geographic valve, and human intuition, mirroring the instinct to blow hard to clear a blocked ear, dictates that maximum military tonnage should secure the strait and force the flow of oil to resume. But the isomorphism holds true. The control system grammar predicts the exact opposite of what military intuition suggests, because
Applying force doesn't work, right?
applying two massive opposing forces to a single choke point doesn't equalize the pressure. It permanently welds the valve shut. Throughput of oil didn't rise as the naval presence increased. It plummeted to near zero and stayed paralyzed for months.
More force simply resulted in deeper stasis. You are looking at the geopolitical equivalent of a clamped eustachian tube, and the infographic visualizes this dread perfectly. The cover art shows a massive rusted oil tanker sitting idle in dark water, surrounded by gray military silhouettes. The caption simply reads, "Hormuz won't open by force. Pressure needs a drain."
Pressure needs a drain. Yeah, the upper congestion here is the strait itself, compounded by the immense narrative pressure of the naval blockade, the skyrocketing global fuel prices, and the relentless media cycle to restore flow. You cannot add more pressure. You must construct the planetary drains.
Okay, so what does a drain actually look like at the scale of international shipping?
The physical equivalents of those distant acupressure points are bypass pipelines. The sources focus on the Saudi East-West pipeline, which runs across the Arabian Peninsula to the Red Sea, and the UAE's Habshan-Fujairah pipeline, which empties into the Gulf of Oman.
Okay, so physically moving the oil around the choke point.
Exactly. These lines physically transport crude oil overland, bypassing Hormuz entirely, directly to open water. Every single barrel of oil that successfully exits through a bypass pipeline lowers the structural pressure on the contested strait. It mathematically reduces the geopolitical payoff of holding the valve hostage.
I have to push back on the viability of that solution, though, because the text itself acknowledges a massive logistical flaw. Those bypass pipelines, even running at maximum capacity, cannot carry anything close to the 20 million barrels a day that Hormuz handles. So to address the shortfall, the text introduces the concept of converting the strait into a metered utility. The idea is to turn Hormuz into a neutral, tariff-governed toll road that no single nation owns. In theory, yes, but the text admits this is completely failing in practice. China refuses the proposed tolling system, Iran demands their own sovereign forces supervise the transit, and the US insists on its own security terms. Everyone is still desperately fighting for ownership of the valve.
The author concedes that the metered utility is currently paralyzed by friction. However, they argue this friction doesn't invalidate the model. Rather, it proves its diagnostic accuracy. It pinpoints exactly where the stasis originates. The valve will never function as a smooth utility as long as the primary actors treat it as a territorial prize to be conquered. The structural model isn't promising some utopian diplomatic era. It is merely diagnosing the underlying mechanics of why the traffic has stopped.
Okay, so if the physical bypass pipelines aren't large enough and the meter utility concept is stalled out by national pride, how did the system actually begin to move? Just as quieting the gut's distress alarm allowed the ear to relax.
Quieting the narrative and military pressure on the global stage finally began to loosen the strait. Exactly. The text identifies this phase as the planetary vagal pause.
On May 18th, the U.S. officially paused its planned strike packages to allow for delicate back-channel negotiations mediated by Pakistan and Qatar. And pay attention to how the broader system reacted. The very moment that reduction in threat was credibly signaled, global oil futures dropped by 10%.
Wow, just from the pause. From the pause. By late May, diplomats had largely negotiated a draft memorandum to restore commercial traffic to pre-war levels. It is vital to note that a battlefield victory didn't open the valve.
It was stepping back.
A conscious pause in applied force, combined with the opening of diplomatic and economic drains, is what finally reduced the pressure. It was the global autonomic nervous system finally shifting out of fight or flight and into rest and digest.
That's a great way to put it. Now, to track this timeline, the source introduces one final layer of analysis. And I have to admit, you are going to have to do some heavy lifting to convince me we should take this seriously.
I know where you're going with this. They bring in mundane astrology to track the geopolitical conflict. Why are we talking about planets in the context of naval blockades? The framing here is absolutely crucial. To prevent this from sounding like pseudoscience, the author explicitly states this is not a causal relationship.
Okay, good.
The planets in our solar system do not generate gravity waves that cause admirals to launch missiles. Instead, the author presents mundane astrology purely as a symbolic register or a mathematical calibration tool. The analogy they use to defend this is actually quite clever. They tell the reader to treat it like a tide chart drawn up by an ancient sailor who has absolutely no concept of lunar gravity. The sailor doesn't know the astrophysics of why the water rises and falls, but because they meticulously tracked the patterns over time, their chart is still highly accurate for knowing when to expect high tide. It is an observational pattern language developed over centuries, tracking correlations between repeating celestial cycles and shifting human pressures. It tracks the psychology of historical cycles.
Okay, I can see that. What elevates this above a generic daily horoscope is the application of analytical discipline. The practitioners provide falsifiable windows. They commit specific future dates to test the model.
Let's look at the historical data they use to back this up. They point to a 36-year macroeconomic oil cycle, which they track using the conjunction of Saturn and Neptune, a very specific alignment. Right. Historically, they note this exact celestial alignment coincided with the CIA-backed coup in Iran in 1953, and then again 36 years later with the death of Iran's first supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, in 1989. Fast forward to this current crisis, and that exact conjunction went mathematically exact on February 20, 2026.
Which was exactly 8 days before the US and Israeli strikes initiated the war. Again, we are not arguing causality, but as an observational pattern to test against human behavioral rhythms, the specificity is remarkable.
It really is. It suggests that institutional memory fades or generational guards change on a relatively predictable clock. They also track what they call the grinding valve, mapped to a conjunction of Mars and Saturn in mid-April. In their symbolic language, Mars represents kinetic force and military action, while Saturn represents restriction, borders, and blockages. So the symbolism translates to force grinding against a wall.
And historically, that alignment landed in the exact weeks the strait seized into total paralysis with the US blockade and the Iranian counter-blockade. Yeah, two massive forces locked together, unable to move. But the true test of any predictive model is the forward-looking dates. The text plants two specific flags in the future, July 4 and December 5, 2026.
Yes, the test dates. They argue that a Mars-Uranus conjunction activates specific geographic regions around Oman, Pakistan, and Afghanistan on these precise dates, suggesting a high probability of volatile, sudden rupture in the area. This is where the structural discipline proves its worth. If the region passes through early July and early December without any significant flare-ups, the astrological reading was simply background noise, and the model failed the test completely. However, if geopolitical volatility clusters heavily around those specific timestamps, the register proves useful as a timing indicator. Writing the prediction down before the events occur is what separates a genuine calibration tool from retroactive storytelling.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, navigating wildly different scales of reality. We started with the microscopic wiring of the vagus nerve and the misery of a 5 a.m. earache, transitioned through the ancient structural maps of traditional Chinese medicine, and scaled all the way up to the Strait of Hormuz, bypass pipelines, and generational historical cycles. While the scales shift drastically, the core thesis remains incredibly steady. Whether you are troubleshooting your own biology, a corporate logistics chain, or a global theater of war, forcing a choke point almost always welds it shut.
It just doesn't work. No, adding opposing kinetic force to a blockage doesn't generate flow. It only deepens the stasis. The effective engineering move is always to create a downstream drain, lower the ambient pressure of the system, and allow the natural gradients to equalize themselves.
A healthy gut definitely won't move an idle oil tanker.
It won't. But the skill of perception we discussed today absolutely transfers across domains. It really does. The ability to recognize a choke point for what it is, resist the primal, immediate urge to attack it with force, and instead step back to engineer a downstream drain, that is a universal control system competence. I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to apply to your own life today. Think about a recurring choke point you are dealing with right now. Maybe it's a gridlocked creative project at work, a stalled negotiation, or a recurring frustrating argument with a partner. Are you currently applying more and more force, trying to yell louder or push harder to blast that blockage open? And if you are, what would it look like to stop fighting for control of the valve, step back, and build a drain instead?
And on that incredibly insightful note, Marilyn, we've come to the end of another fascinating deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us and unpacking the choke point code for our listeners today.
It was my absolute pleasure, Marcus. It's a framework I believe everyone can benefit from understanding.
Absolutely. And to all of you listening and watching, thank you for tuning in to this episode. If you found today's conversation valuable, please take a moment to hit that like button, leave us a comment with your thoughts, share this episode with someone who might benefit, and, of course, subscribe to our channel. Your support truly helps our network grow and allows us to bring you more content like this.
We hope this discussion has given you a fresh perspective on how to approach the blockages, big or small, in your own life. Remember, the solution often isn't more force, but a thoughtfully constructed drain.
Indeed. Until next time, keep observing, keep learning, and keep creating those drains. We'll talk to you soon.